They say some moments haunt you forever. It's been 2 years since that day, 2 years since everything changed. It was supposed to be simple, a beach trip with my son Leonard. My husband couldn't make it. He never did. Work always came first, and I was used to that. Used to being alone. But that day didn't feel normal. We spread out the towels. I laid down, finally feeling free of the world's noise. I asked Leonard to help, to rub some oil on my back. I didn't think twice about it. He's my son. Why would I? At first it was nothing. Just his hands, just helping me out. But then I felt it. I felt him linger. Lower and lower. And I didn't stop him. Why didn't I stop him? You think you know yourself. You think you know your family. But there's always a moment, one moment that can unravel everything. For me, it happened that day on this beach, and I've never been the same. Phoenix and I had been married for over 15 years. If you asked anyone who knew us, they'd say we were the perfect couple. A nice house, good kids, and a steady life. But you don't see the cracks until you're inside the walls. You don't feel the emptiness unless you're the one living it. For years, Phoenix's job was his world. He was always working late nights, weekends, holidays. I used to tell myself that he did it for us, that the overtime, the dedication was for the life he was building for our family. But after so long, that story starts to fall apart. What good is a home if no one's ever in it? I became invisible to him. When he came home, he barely looked at me. He stopped asking how I felt, what I wanted, what I needed. We spoke in short sentences, mostly about bills, groceries, and the kids. He loved Leonard and his little sister Isa, but even with them, his presence was like a shadow. He was there, but not really. I used to sit at the table across from him, wondering if he still saw me at all. That morning, I remember standing in the kitchen as Phoenix hurried out the door. He grabbed his briefcase, kissed the top of Isa's head, and glanced at me just once. "Sorry, Freya, I can't make it today. Something came up at work." I didn't even argue. I just nodded like I always did, my throat tight. I told myself it was fine. Leonard and I could go on our own. Leonard was 16 back then, tall, lanky, with the same brown eyes his father had, but a softer face. He didn't say much, not even when I told him it would just be the two of us. I think he'd gotten used to his dad bailing too. He just shrugged, grabbed the bags, and followed me to the car. I watched him in the passenger seat on the way there, earbuds in, staring out the window like teenagers always do. I couldn't help but smile. He was growing up so fast, and sometimes I wondered if I'd blink and lose him too. The drive to the beach felt endless. My mind wandered, as it always did, to Phoenix. I thought about all the things we used to do together. Movie nights, long walks, trips to nowhere just for the fun of it. I thought about the way he used to touch me, the way his eyes would light up when he saw me. I hadn't felt that in years. I hadn't felt anything. I was so tired of being unseen. We finally arrived, and Leonard helped me carry the bags to a quiet spot near the water. I laid out the towels while he set up the umbrella. I don't know why I suddenly felt the need to talk to him. Maybe it was because he was the only one there. Maybe I just needed someone to hear me. "It's nice to get out, don't you think?" I said, trying to sound cheerful. He just nodded, pushing his hair back with his hand. "Yeah, Mom, it's nice." I laid down on the towel, feeling the heat of the sun soak into my skin. I didn't move for a while. I just let myself go still, like I was trying to let the weight of the last few years lift off me, even for just an hour. But then I remembered the oil. I sat up and turned to Leonard. "Can you help me rub this on my back?" I asked. "I can't reach it myself." He looked at me for a second, almost hesitant, before taking the bottle from my hand. I laid back down, face to the towel, and waited. The first touch was gentle, careful. His hands were unsure, like he didn't want to hurt me. I smiled to myself because it reminded me of when he was little, when he used to hold my hand to cross the street. His hands had been so small back then. "You can press a little harder," I told him, my voice muffled. "It's okay." He listened, and his hands grew firmer as he rubbed the oil across my shoulders and down my back. I closed my eyes and tried to focus on the warmth, the rhythm of his touch. For a moment I let myself enjoy it. It had been so long since anyone had touched me at all, and that thought hit me harder than I wanted to admit. But then I felt his hands move lower, slowly, carefully, down the curve of my back. My breath caught in my throat, and I opened my mouth to say something, but nothing came out. My mind raced, but I stayed silent. I told myself it was fine, that he was just helping, that I was imagining things. But I wasn't. His hands hovered there for a moment, near the edge of where my towel ended. I could feel his hesitation. I could feel my own. And instead of stopping him, I said it. "It's okay. You can rub there too." The words hung in the air like something poisonous, and the moment they left my mouth, I knew I couldn't take them back. Leonard didn't say anything. He didn't stop either. I squeezed my eyes shut and felt his hands on me, lower than they should have been. My heart was pounding so hard I thought he might hear it. I wanted to move, to sit up, to tell him to stop. But I didn't. I couldn't. I let it happen. Even now, I don't know why. Maybe it was the loneliness. Maybe I was too desperate to feel wanted, even if it was wrong. Or maybe I just didn't care anymore. That day on the beach, everything inside me broke, and nothing would ever be the same again. I nodded, the hollow feeling in my chest growing with each passing second. Phoenix's presence was like a shadow in the room, there but not really there. He undid his tie and dropped it on the dresser. I watched his movements absently, but inside I was spiraling. The silence between us was heavier than anything I had ever felt. His footsteps across the floor were the only sound, and when he stopped behind me, I felt his breath on the back of my neck, warm and familiar. His hands rested briefly on my shoulders, but it was an impersonal touch. It didn't feel like it used to, like the hands of the man I'd married. It felt distant, as if we were strangers, two people who had once loved each other but had long since forgotten how. "Freya," he said softly. "We need to talk." I nodded without turning around. I already knew what was coming, even though I wasn't sure I was ready for it. We had been walking around the elephant in the room for years, and it was finally starting to show its ugly face. But the thing that frightened me most wasn't the confrontation. It wasn't the fact that our marriage was unraveling at the seams, it was what had happened with Leonard. I swallowed hard, the tightness in my throat threatening to choke me. God, what had I done? "I'm listening," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Phoenix didn't respond immediately. I could feel his hesitation, the weight of his words as they sat between us, unsaid. He took a deep breath before speaking again, his voice different, softer, more uncertain than I had ever heard it. "I don't know what's been going on with us, Freya," he said, the words rough, as if they didn't want to come out. "But I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pretending that everything's fine when it's not. He trailed off, his voice faltering. "You're distant. You've been distant for so long." I closed my eyes, the words stabbing through me. He was right. I had been distant, but I had been distant because of him. Because of how he shut me out. Because of the emptiness I felt every time he left for work, every time he came home and barely acknowledged my presence. But that's no excuse. What had happened with Leonard, what I had allowed to happen, was my fault and mine alone. No amount of blaming Phoenix would change that. "I'm sorry," I muttered, almost too quietly for him to hear. My hands were trembling, and I found myself clenching them into fists to stop the shaking. I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to get you to see me again. Phoenix's silence was deafening. When he finally spoke, his words were colder, tinged with something like disappointment, something like fear. Freya, it's not just that. There's something wrong. Something I can't ignore anymore. I'm not blind. I saw the way you and Leonard were acting today. And I saw the way you were acting before. What's going on? The question hung in the air, suffocating in its weight. He knows. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest, the blood rushing in my ears. For a moment I felt the room tilt on its axis, as if the ground was giving way beneath me. I didn't know how to respond. How could I explain to him what had happened? How could I admit to my husband that I had crossed a line so far beyond anything I could understand, something that made no sense, something I couldn't even comprehend? I turned to face him, but I couldn't look him in the eyes. The shame was too much. It was all I could feel, like a heavy blanket suffocating me. Phoenix, my voice cracked and I hated how weak I sounded. I made a mistake. What mistake? He asked, his voice growing harder, a defensive edge creeping in. The words stuck in my throat, and I felt as though they were made of stone, weighing me down. I didn't stop him. I didn't stop Leonard. There. I said it. The truth. Phoenix's face drained of color. He staggered back as if I had slapped him, and for a moment I almost thought he was going to fall. He stared at me, his mouth slightly open, his eyes wide with disbelief. What? He said, his voice hoarse. What do you mean, you didn't stop him? The question was more of a statement. His mind couldn't process it. Neither could mine. I could see the realization beginning to dawn in his eyes, and it made me feel smaller than I had ever felt in my entire life. I let him. I couldn't finish the sentence. The words were too ugly, too wrong. I couldn't say it aloud. Even now, it felt like I was drowning in the shame of it. Phoenix took another step back, his hands trembling as he pressed them against his forehead. Oh my God, Freya. What the hell happened? His voice cracked, and for the first time I saw the hurt in his eyes. Real hurt. Not the kind of hurt that comes from misunderstandings, but the kind that comes when someone betrays you so deeply, it shatters everything. I don't know what's wrong with me, I whispered, my voice barely audible, even to my own ears. I was so lonely, Phoenix. And he was there. He touched me, and I let him. The words came out in a rush, tumbling over one another, too fast for me to take back. My heart was hammering in my chest, the guilt suffocating me. I wanted to apologize 1,000 times, but no apology would ever be enough. Phoenix was silent for a long time. And when he finally spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can forgive you for this, Freya. I don't know if I can even look at you the same way again. His words hit me like a punch to the gut, and for a moment I thought I might collapse. The pain of his betrayal, his anger, his disbelief, was nothing compared to the weight of my own guilt. But I had already lost him, hadn't I? We had both lost each other a long time ago. The room felt colder, even though the heat of the day still lingered outside. There was nothing left to say. Nothing left to fix. For the first time in years, I felt truly alone.